right, it looks like most everyone has made it into the room. Welcome to the Power of Tribal and Indigenous Data Sovereignty. Thank you for joining us for this last breakout of the day. This session may be set up a little different than the breakout session that you went to in the last session. This one is more of our traditional meeting style because we want it to be an interactive conversation and discussion. So we invite you, if you feel comfortable, to join us on camera, as well as you'll have opportunities throughout to actually unmute and chat. And then, of course, you'll still have the chat boxes available to interact that way as well. As we get started, I'll go ahead and play our standard disclaimer. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to your presenter for the day, Isaac Sicha.
Well, thank you for that. And how's everybody doing? Can you hear me? I can see Michelle, Callie, and Drew. All right. So if I call anyone, I'm sorry, you're the first ones that I see. And so I'll be like, hey, I need some help. All right. Well, I'm happy to see you all today. I'm glad that we've had this opportunity to visit. Yes, so let's just dive right in. So it looks like we're on our journey today. So this is a big question, isn't it? Like, what is data sovereignty? How does tribal data sovereignty work? You know, all of this stuff. And honestly, I can't tell you one specific definition. There are so many, right? Like, I'm guessing some of you did a couple Google searches. Well, I go to University of Washington, so it's a Bing search for us. And so, you know, that's how it works. So before, I want to make sure that we kind of get started with this. And so when I teach at the University of Washington, I usually like to start my classes and presentations with questions of the day. So that's really what I wanted to do with our questions. So first, though, we're looking at our journey, and you can see this is what we're going to discuss today. We're going to go through our questions. We're going to kind of define for this conversation, what is tribal data sovereignty? Then kind of tie that into ancestral or traditional, a lot of different ways that we say our own ways, right? We're going to talk about those challenges to data sovereignty. There's a lot, of course, just like many other things that we're facing now. But I'm also looking at promising practices. I don't say best practices because they're going to change. Yeah, they're going to be different tomorrow than they were yesterday. And so promising today. Also going to go through some legal frameworks. So legal frameworks talking about challenges that then have become impediments into our tribal sovereignty. And then finally, I'm going to have some recommendations for tribal data sovereignty. I'm not going to today explain to you how to build a database or a cloud-based data server, although that's what I'm working on in my PhD. I really am just going to kind of get us at a neutral point. And so we'll go on to the next slide here. And here you'll see we have our questions, okay? And as I was saying before, these are the 3 questions that I'm going to focus on for our, 5 questions. There's 2 more in the next slide. So we're going to focus on these 5 questions, okay? We're going to talk about how familiar we are. We're going to talk about what does ancestral or traditional mean. We're going to talk about what are the biggest challenges that tribes face in protecting our data. And then on the next slide, we have our best practices. That was at one point, I have a friend to go through and change that back to promising practices. And then finally, on slide 5, we'll have how do you think federal agencies and other stakeholders can better support tribal data sovereignty efforts? So Sarah, if we could go to slide 6, please. I'm going to kind of get us moving here. Okay, so introduction, that's me. My name is Isaac Sicha. I am I'm a citizen of the Abzalogai Nation. For those that don't know, that's Crow. I am also a descendant of the Tsitsis, the Northern Cheyenne, and also Lakota from as well. So I'm also getting messages. As I said in earlier, I am in finals week and my advisor is messaging me at the same time. You know how it is, too much data, too much stuff going at the same time. But I am currently working on my PhD at the Information School at the University of Washington, where I am focusing on tribal data sovereignty and whatever that means today. I'm also getting a master's degree in information. I already have a master's in information management and a bachelor of science in forestry. So I did some terrestrial science at the beginning, and then I moved into the cloud, so the cloud-based. I'm currently a teacher and a lecturer in the Department of American Indian Studies, where I teach on powwow. Yes, we have a 5-credit powwow class. It's something I'm really excited about because, you know, planning, running, putting everything on is such a big thing that that we want to make sure that we get our degrees and our credits for it. My specializations currently are in tribal sovereignty writ large, right? All tribal sovereignty, American Indian and Alaska Native Ed, K-20, information studies, traditional knowledge organization, oral history, systems of knowledge, food sovereignty, and social justice. You know how most of us kind of just fall into that, right? Like I didn't want to be in all of those fields, but as I've said before, is we're like too little butter on too big a toast. You know, we just get spread so thin, and even though I have a greasy forehead, it's not enough. It's just not enough tried to get us there. So on to the next one. We'll just dive right in. And, you know, now think back to them questions that we posed at the very beginning of class, like, what is tribal data sovereignty? Well, that is a massive, massive question. And so before I move forward, go ahead and in the chat, please feel free to dive in at any time. Does anyone want to share what tribal data sovereignty or indigenous data sovereignty means to you? I'll take about, add it as we go, because I want to make sure that, you know, we're sticking to our time. We only have a little bit of time here together. So think about that. And go ahead and add in chat, what is tribal data sovereignty or indigenous data sovereignty? What does it mean to you, right? And so try to do it without open with ChatGPT and on Google and Bing and all of those sources. We want to make sure we're trying our best here. And then I'll tell you what I feel it is today. But, you know, I want to make sure that, you know, like we're doing that. Yes, thank you for the class. We fought for that as a student. we fought for that when I was an undergrad at UW, and now we have 5 credits. So thank you for that. Good. All right. All right. So now that we have that, yes, oral histories, stories, those are, that is tribal data sovereignty, right? We also have working with tribal evaluation strategies. Yep, MSU, woo woo, go Cats. It is knowledge systems, oral drawings, attire, ceremonies, language. Yeah, right. All right, correct. Those are all correct. For us today, the definition that we're going to be kind of using is going to be including people. Absolutely, our knowledge holders. Absolutely, that is correct. So tribal data and even spectrum sovereignty, I can get into spectrum sovereignty as well, are anchored in the sovereign rights of tribes to govern ourselves and our data as established between tribal and federal government. Yes, I understand, and I'm going to say this right up the bat, I understand that that is upholding Western values. I understand that that is us using a colonizing language to express it. However, with that acknowledged, now we can continue moving forward, right? And like I said before, everything I'm saying today could be different tomorrow. So I always say, as it stands today. Another way to define this giant, I have babies, so my ginormous idea is that indigenous data sovereignty is the right of indigenous peoples and tribes to govern the collection, ownership, and application of their own data. And where I'm citing that from is shared in the resources at the end. Another way, because there are so many, is to define tribal data sovereignty is the inherent right of Native American tribes to govern, Native American, American Alaska Native, this is just from a source that I pulled it, to govern and exercise control over their own data. It recognizes the authority of tribal governance to make decisions regarding the collection, storage, access, and use of data that pertains to their communities, lands, and resources. See how then we add traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, we add language, we add all of those lands and resources. Tribal data sovereignty is grounded in the principles of self-determination, self-governance, and the protection of tribal cultural heritage, traditions, and knowledge. That long one, that's what speaks to me. And those are some of the ones that you all can kind of build off of, you know, or say, hey, that's BS too, and start all over. That's cool. I am a scientist, and I do reserve the right to be wrong. I also reserve the right to change my mind. So I think that's one thing that I really like to do. So let's talk about this brief history and evolution, because, you know, we could talk about this all day, or I could at least. I can geek out on this all day. So tribal nations and self-governance, let's start right there. So the U.S. Supreme Court, and this is from Slotnick in 2017, that the U.S. Supreme Court has acknowledged that tribal governments are the oldest sovereigns on the continent. Native American sovereignty predates the sovereignty of the United States, and as such, tribes and tribal people maintain some degree of control through though a diminished measure of sovereignty, to be sure. Tribal sovereignty includes the right to govern one's community, the ability to preserve one's culture, and the right to control one's own economy. The economy, now that's a pretty big one, right? Some of the stuff I've been learning while I'm doing my research, what I was working on before our meeting, was talking about circular economy. And so now I want to dig more into that on my own time, but I want to plant that in your minds, maybe start thinking about this circular economy. The statement goes on to say that the sovereignty status, tribal sovereignty encompassing Native American military, social, economic development of Indian nations still remains today. As sovereign entities, Indian nations are guaranteed the power and or right to determine their form of government, our citizenship, enforce laws through our own police force and courts, taxes, and regulatory property use. Yet, as we know, the fight to preserve tribal sovereignty and treaty rights has long been at the forefront and continues to be challenged every day. So I posit that treaties and agreements signed between tribal nations and the United States government recognizing tribal sovereignty and self-determination also then expands into what we call the cloud, right? The fact that we're able to meet virtually right now, the fact that we're able to be in community, albeit at separate locations, that is the center of our treaty rights. And I challenge that because I say it's an economic challenge, because there's so much commerce in the air, right? There's so much that's happening in the cloud. And folks that don't know what the cloud is, we'll get into that too. Just we'll get there. So the emergence of data collection, especially with the stuff we just went through with COVID, the stuff that we're going through education, the stuff we're going through with collision data, but also the successes, not just the deficit models, but the successes that we're trying to also express, is pretty massive when I'm talking about the emergence of data collection. So with the arrival of data collection and information systems, tribal communities began to encounter issues related to ownership, control, and protection of our data. This includes data related to tribal membership, right? Enrollment, lands, resources, and cultural heritage. Like I always like to say, cultural heritage meaning language, songs, stories, history, and other similar shared knowledge. The largest information system that immediately comes to my mind is the census, right? The largest information system. Did you ever think of census in that way? What do you think? Now, this is a question for the group. Like, do you think that the census is an information system, or is it a means to fulfill information needs in that way? That's a hard question, isn't it? Is that an information system? Taking our census. What else is in there? Income, education level, citizenship, enrollment, however that's collected. That's why I brought that forward, because that is a really massive system. Then we'll move on past the emergence of data collection. Now we're moving into the termination era and assimilation. And unfortunately, the folks on this call today have a deep understanding of the termination era and assimilationist practices of colonizing governments. I won't go too deeply into that definition because we unfortunately live it all the time. We're practicing a language right now that is not traditional to us. However, did you know that termination policies also had profound impacts on tribal sovereignty and control over data? Yeah, it is. It was pretty massive. So you may be thinking, how? Well, let's dig a little deeper, because you'll see that this era had a profound effect on tribal and indigenous nations' data sovereignty. Along the lines, we know removal and relinquishment of tribal lands. So how did it, beyond being displaced, dehomed, moved around, dehumanized along the way, how did this affect our data sovereignty? Well, under the termination policy, tribes were encouraged or forced to relinquish their lands and dissolve their reservations, right? This led to the loss of control over ancestral lands, resources, and the associated data that tribes had historically managed and protected. When we were displaced from somewhere, we didn't know how to grow a crop. We were displaced hundreds, thousands of miles away. Our relationship to that traditional ecological knowledge, that traditional ancestral data, was also broken. Did we ever think of that? If we talk about food sovereignty, well, here it is, folks. This is it at a data level. The dissolution of tribal governments. Termination policy sought to dissolve tribal governments, extinguishing their sovereign status and tribal authority. This resulted in a loss of governance structure and decision-making power over various aspects of tribal life, including the management and control of data, right? When your power is taken away, that ability to keep that information is also broken. So a loss of autonomy in data management. So with the dissolution of tribal governance, now we kind of see we're building off of the last one. Tribes lost their ability to autonomously govern and manage their data. The US government took control of tribal records and data, impacting tribes' ability to access. That's another big thing. Access, protect, and utilize their own information for the benefits of their communities. That's pretty big, because a lot of times when you're trying to get information, let's say you want to ask Department of Commerce or Transportation about collision data. Who do you have to ask? City, county, state, region, Fed, right? All of those to get something that we, our single selves, should have complete control over. Yeah, that's a big stretch, but I'm just saying that's how many steps we have to take to get this one piece of information that we need, right? The disruption of tribal knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge organization, we call that IKO or TKO. Tribal knowledge systems encompass traditional knowledge, cultural heritage, and traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, passed down through generations. The termination policy disrupted the transmission and preservation of this knowledge. So just going back to what we said in chat, I'll pull it up. What we said in chat is knowledge, as we said here, it is our knowledge holders, speakers, and healers. You see how it goes right into that. See, you already know what we're talking about. So I know that this big question is kind of boiling down a little bit, because now that tradition, that knowledge, that data, as it were, that was passing down through generations has now been snuffed out. The termination policy disrupted the transmission and preservation of this knowledge, including data related to customs, languages, and practices, right? Like, wow, okay. Now you're kind of seeing it a little bit deeper now. So those challenges in data collection and documentation, well, termination policy disrupted data collection and documentation efforts within tribal communities. Without strong tribal governance structures and support, including traditional, because I know not all of us agree with the governmental layout of our tribes, the traditional knowledge structures, the systemic collection and maintenance of tribal data became challenging, impacting the availability and accuracy of important information. We see this today. with MMIP, with collision data, internet connectivity, and any number of other issues. Then finally, that brief history and evolution. Now we're on to that erosion of trust and self-determination. The termination policy undermined the trust and confidence of tribes in the federal government's commitment to tribal sovereignty and self-determination. This erosion of trust has lasting, we could even say, effects on tribal communities' ability to assert their rights, including their data sovereignty. See that, and that's just one policy. that's just through termination. I didn't get into all the other subparts of it, right? So now we're moving on into what we say is the I'm trying to pull up my notes here. The recognition of tribal sovereignty, right? So we also have now the recognition of tribal sovereignty. And please, folks, if you have questions, jump in at any time. I know I can just talk all day, so I want to make sure that if you have anything, please dive in at any moment. I think we can unmute, right? Okay. Let's see here. This thing has to be somehow right. This is always the best part of teaching online.
Yeah, they are able to unmute if they would like to chat.
All right, good. Well, I'll keep going then. So now we finished termination, right? Now we're moving into recognition of tribal sovereignty. So in the late 20th century, there was the resurgence of indigenous rights movement, leading to the increased recognition of tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Legal and policy developments such as Indian Self-Determination and Education Act of 75 reinforced tribal authority and decision-making. I know a lot of you know this by heart. I do. I also want to make sure for those that we don't know, that we're also getting on the same level. So that's why I'm kind of just giving you a quick background on this. After that recognition of tribal sovereignty, now we're moving into the evolution of tribal data governance. Now, tribal nations began asserting their data sovereignty rights and developing strategies for data governance in the late 20th century and early 21st century. Oh, thank you. This involved creating tribal data protection laws, data management protocols, tribal IRB or institutional review boards, and partnerships with research institutions and non-profit organizations to protect tribal data and ensure its appropriate use. Yes, I understand that there's also a lot of distrust in our institutions of higher learning, our land grab universities. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant land grant universities and all those others, right? I do. But there's also this point now where that growth and the healing is trying to occur. So the federal policy here now that I'm moving on to is say, oh yeah, the important is federal policy. So the importance of tribal data sovereignty has been recognized in various federal policies and initiatives now. For example, Department of the Interior's data sharing and governance policy includes provisions for tribal data sovereignty and respect for tribal interests in data management. However, always with the grain of salt, right? I did not see a dedicated space for tribal or indigenous representation on the data governance board. And it seems like a pretty big miss on that one, right? You're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so I think that's one of the things that I noticed, and I'll talk about later on recommendations to help us go. All right, so on to the next slide now, the ancestral or traditional data. Now, this one's fun. I like this. Now, this is where I really start geeking out. And I guess I should explain what's behind me, because I know a lot of folks are asking. That's my regalia. I dance crow style. So that's my regalia. And that little silver one, that's my baby's. That's his round bustle in the middle. And then there's my other outfit right there. So I know a lot of folks like, you looks like you have antennas. It's just my, here, I'll show you. That's my spikes for my crow outfit. So I know we had that question. I saw that. So we'll keep moving. So on to ancestral data. All right. Again, these definitions are what works for us today. This is not an easy question to answer because we have so many different ways of saying a similar point. This data is knowledge, it's information, ways of knowing, ways of being, cultural artifacts, language, and cultural protocols that have been passed down through generations. It also includes traditional ecological knowledge, sacred texts, however we wrote down our languages or stories, could have been an art, and culturally significant materials as identified by our people. Ancestral data holds immense power. Right? Your name, your language, that regalia behind me, it holds immense power for our tribes as it forms the foundation of cultural identity, spirituality, and connection to place and to ancestors. It embodies the wisdom, the values, and teachings of previous generation and serves as a vital resource for tribal self-determination, decision-making, and cultural revitalization efforts. That little outfit right there, that's what it means to me and to some folks on this call. Of course, there's challenges, right? Like we can see there's challenges that tribes face, and so we'll go through that a little bit. So challenges tribes face in protecting and stewarding mean, taking care of, keep it alive, keep it well, safe, healthy, accessible. We can stay on the last slide still. Right here. So right there, still, yeah, right there. So we talk about intellectual property rights. Oh man, let's talk about intellectual property rights. You know what I'm saying? That becomes a really massive thing. Like, who owns that song? Do you own it? Does your family own it? Does your clan own it? Does your tribe own it? Those are huge, massive questions, right? So intellectual property rights. So navigating intellectual property frameworks that often do not adequately recognize or protect traditional knowledge and cultural expression. Just like I said there, when I sing a song at an event that was given to me on loan, essentially, folks are like, can I sing that song? I'm like, no, you may not. You may know it by heart, but no, you may not perform that in ceremony because it's not my right to give it away. How hard is that to explain to folks, right? Like, well, I recorded it. Can't I just play it again? You could, but then you'd be absolutely against tribal data sovereignty at that point in time, and actually cultural protocols, right? You see that? That's why I'm trying to like tie this and braid this Western way into our traditional way of being. Again, who owns that song? Person, family, clan, band, tribe, nation, especially for those of us who are part of a nation. Massive, massive issues. Other challenges, access and control, right? They're similar, but you have to balance the need to preserve cultural integrity while ensuring appropriate access and control of ancestral or traditional data within tribal communities. How? I don't know. I couldn't tell you because maybe folks want to focus on the stomp ground rather than the elected tribal council, or vice versa, right? Like, how does that work? Well, this is why I chose this image here. I chose the highlight the be fair and care image and definition from the GIDA website, where they say that the current movement toward open data and open science, right? Open data, open science, everything's for everybody, does not fully engage with Indigenous people's rights and interests. Existing principles within the open data movement, fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, primarily focused on characteristics of data that will facilitate increased data sharing among entities while ignoring power differentials in historical context. The emphasis on greater data sharing alone creates a tension for Indigenous peoples who are asserting greater control over the application and use of Indigenous data knowledge for collective benefit. Sometimes we don't want to be found, right? Sometimes it should not be findable. Sometimes I shouldn't be able to access other tribe's information without explicit permission, with extreme use of it. Like, you can only use it for this, right? That's why I brought this up. So then that leads us then to the care. This includes the right to create value from indigenous data in ways that are grounded in our worldview and realize opportunities within the knowledge economy. These care principles for indigenous data governance are people and purpose oriented, reflecting the crucial role of data in advancing innovation and self-determination. These principles complement the existing FAIR, so they complement the FAIR principles, encouraging open and other data movements to consider both people and purpose of their advocacy and pursuits, right? It's very hard when you're trying to build allies and advocates when they're going too far. They went past this, right? Slow down, slow down. We need to dial you back. We need to bring you back a little bit, you know, cool your jets. That's what this is really talking about. Because not only do we want allies and advocates, we want accomplices, don't we? And I forgot who told me that, but yeah, man, your accomplice, your ally will bail you out. Your accomplice will be in jail next to you saying, that was awesome. We should do that again. There's a difference, folks, right? It's just like, I like to bring that in because that's how I, in my mind, think about this. Then you have the cultural appropriation. Addressing the risks of misappropriation and misuse of ancestral data by external entities without proper consent or respect for tribal protocols. Again, the song that I was talking about. An example of this, and here's an example I think we all know, are those photos taken by Edward S. Curtis. We know him, right? Some of our ancestors are in those photos. Not all those photos were meant to be seen by folks outside the tribe or nation, or seen by human at all, right? I'm thinking of some of those piercings, the Sundance, those things that should be between the dancer and their caregiver, or just that dancer, or nobody, right? But those photos exist, don't they? We can't take it back. Pandora's box has been opened. That's the example of what I'm talking about. A lot of folks think cultural appropriation is like wearing a headdress or wearing these feathers during Halloween. No, I'm talking about those big things, like lessening the power of our traditional protocols and ceremony. Now we have cultural appropriation, then we're talking about preservation and storage. Implementing effective strategies for the preservation, digitization, and safe storage of traditional data, considering the fragile nature of some materials and the need for long-term sustainability. I like to focus on this a lot, preservation and storage, right? We talk about getting this information, how do we take care of it? How do we recall it? Who has rights to that? Who has access? That's a big question. That's for each tribe to figure out on our own. There's guidelines to be sure. And in fact, I'm working on the guidelines with one of my research partners here. But let's braid it together. Now we're on that final point of this slide. Braiding together that tradition and self-determination and cultural revite. Language and cultural preservation. Traditional data has been instrumental in language revitalization efforts, supporting the preservation and revitalization of Native American languages at risk of extinction. I don't just say extinction, but also the deletion, right? Through government policy, through government inaction of having our languages in schools. And I really like to ask when I'm in meetings with my university folks, I like to say, how come tribes always have to pay for our language? How come here at UW, Seattle, the Lushootseed language has to be paid for, taught by the tribes from the region? Who pays for French and Italian and English? You know, I like to say, I ask those questions and they get real shy. And I said, you know why? It's because it's not taught in Europe. And so when you say those things, you know, you're really saying like, now that's what I mean by Eurocentricity. And I don't know if I introduced myself very well. I'm Crow and I love fighting. And that's one of my superpowers, right? I'm Crow in Northern Cheyenne, so I also fight myself a lot, but that's just the way it goes. So I bring these up in meetings. How come we have to pay for this? How come we're the ones that have to do that? Well, because not in Europe, not taught in Europe. Then that brings me into environmental stewardship. Traditional ecological knowledge contained in ancestral data has been utilized to inform sustainable land management practices, ensuring that the preservation of ecosystems and the promotion of tribal sovereignty over natural resources. I wouldn't say over, I'd say with natural resources. I think I would have changed that verbiage there. In fact, before this presentation, the National Park Service has an entire section dedicated to TEK. Did you all know that? Yeah. On that site, they define traditional ecological knowledge as the ongoing accumulation of knowledge, practice, and belief about relationships between living beings in a specific ecosystem that is acquired by indigenous people over hundreds or thousands of years through direct contact with the environment, handed down through generations, and used for life-sustaining ways. You see now that definition we started with, how it's all kind of tying together now. This knowledge includes the relationship between people, plant, animal, natural phenomenon, landscape, and timing of events for activities such as hunting, fishing, trapping, agriculture, and forestry. It encompasses the whole worldview of a people, which includes ecology, spirituality, human and animal relationships, and more. I was like, wow, that's pretty deep. That's a good way. And I was like, man, that really made sense. And that was from Charles and Kajite from 2020. So kind of moving it, keeping going down here, governance and decision-making. Ancestral data provides a foundation for tribal governance and decision-making, allowing tribes to draw upon historical wisdom and traditional values to shape policies and laws that reflect their unique cultural perspective and priorities. Think about the placement. Now, here's a real-world example. Think about the placement of radio towers, right? I see Michelle's got some hills behind her there. Like, think about what those places are. Maybe that's from home. I don't know. It could be, right? It's someone's home. And let's say we want to put a radio tower on there, right? Or let's think about the construction of telescopes on Mauna Kea, right? These mountains are more than a place with excellent reception and clear views, right? They are the places that our tribes have emerged from the earth, or the place reserved for gods and spirits. So when I talk about governance and decision-making when it comes to data sovereignty, this is some of it. Like, yes, mathematically, that peak has the greatest outreach, the greatest range. It has it'll cast the widest net for, tribal broadband or internet speed connectivity. But should it be built there? Right? That's what I mean through governance. It's not just that we should have it and then all of the policies that we have to follow through with the FCC or any of these other acronym organizations that we are a part of. These are important, critical to our tribes when it comes to that decision-making process. The last point I'm going to make in this slide is that cultural heritage revitalization, that ancestral or traditional data has played a crucial role in revitalizing cultural practices, ceremonies, and arts within indigenous communities, fostering a sense of pride, identity, and cultural continuity. That's the thing, is continuity. We know those other parts are important, but sometimes we forget that how far back our traditions go. We always talk about 7 generations. Well, what about those ones that were before us? Who had that right to dance, who has the right to do these things? That's really important. And that's what this whole slide talks about is traditional and ancestral data. All right, we're going on to our next slide here. It looks like we're doing challenges. So before I keep going, are there any, what questions do we have? Not are there, what questions do we have? You can raise your hand, say it out, type it in chat, any of that stuff. And yes, the reason that TikTok's in there, we're going to talk about TikTok. Any questions? Let me go through here. Yeah. All right, seeing none, that's all right. That's okay. I know I'm the end of your day, so I'll try to expedite the process here, but there's a lot of challenges to go through. Are we ready? All right. That's all right. I'm here. Okie dokie, here we go. on to it. So I'm going to go into all of these for leveraging language support at schools and universities. Oh yeah, let's do that then. All right. So when it comes to strategies for leveraging additional language support, well, thankfully here at the University of Washington, before I was a PhD student, I was UW's very first tribal liaison. So I was the first to kind of get those projects going. I also was the very first director of our native center called Wethlabalt. We raised the $6.1 million, ran it for a few years. Then I got bored and I got back into school. So luckily I have a lot of experience with these kind of questions. So for this one, our Department of American and Indian Studies took the charge, right? They're the ones that were able to get out there and really start pushing for our language to be returned. We used to have Dene language, we had Lakota, and we had Coast Salish Lushootseed at one time when I was an undergrad here. And it was we said it's about time for us to get it back. And so the departments here at the UW, and I'm not sure about all universities, the departments here are really able to kind of create their own curriculum. They're able to actually have direct admit from incoming first-year students. And so it really depends on which university that you're talking about. But we saw a lot of support through it because these tribes in our region were also creating their own language programs. And so we were able to piggyback and support at the same time with our special collections, which is a whole nother issue. I could talk about this all day, but there was a little bit of leverage and at least we were able to kind of click them together like that. Also at our university and many of the universities in our region in the United States have like tribal Native American advisory boards or indigenous action committees or all kinds of groups that we can use to build that support from. It would be great, you know, and we talked about this at one of our OIE events, I think 2 weeks ago, about bringing language into a university, but also creating specific funding lines for it, because if a TCU and a university like UW are going after it, it's really hard because we shouldn't be competing. We should be building, you know, the bridge between each other. And so lots of things. So my strategy would say, let's get our department on it. Let's get a language speaker, and then let's start doing it, right? Because a lot of times it's easier to ask for permission than it is ask for forgiveness. And so that's what we saw, because a lot of times our language speakers may not have that master's degree that the universities want to be a teacher or a lecturer or a visiting scholar, whatever the heck your universities call it. And so just start the process. And you know what's exciting about it, and kind of going off tangentially here, I'm sorry, is that once we saw these students going into their Lushootseed classes, our groups start to create their own language groups. So we had folks that were Ho-Chunk started their language table, the Dene started their language table, the Kanaka Maoli were speaking Hawaiian Native language. It was so cool because then you would hear all those languages at our Native Center. And so what we could do at that time is we would get them food, right? Hungry college students. So then that kind of drew more in. And now it's just this self-sustaining thing. But, you know, using that traditional model of make a space, feed our kids, let them go. And so that's what I would do. Yeah. Well, let's keep on going then. So we have our challenges to tribal data sovereignty. And let's see, can somebody give me the heads up when I'm about, I don't know, 10 minutes from running out of time? So protection of data sovereignty, I'm talking about collection, right? I was able to meet with our research group and the issue came up again of information that has already been extracted, kind of going back to Edward S. Curtis or any of these other extractive research practices, right? The paraphrase answer that I heard from an indigenous scholar was very clear and concise. This issue has been beat to death. We need to move past it now. And I was like, whoa, I was a little taken aback. The damage has been done and this information is out there. Now, how do we rematriate and repatriate it and bring it back within the tribes from which it was extracted? Yeah, it stung. It stung. It stings to hear that, right? It does. It may not be the leading headline in a research paper, but that story, it struck a nerve. And so I said, so what? Now what? Well, we can focus on a few things like cultural sensitivities. The collection of tribal data often requires cultural sensitivity and adherence to tribal protocols. The failure to recognize and respect these cultural considerations can lead to mistrust and reluctance to share data. As a person doing research with tribes now, yes, we know that. Like, I'm in an institution that has some challenging research practices of the past. You know, I can be more upfront, but I'm being recorded in the Department of Ed, so I won't curse around or anything, but it's tough. We also can start talking about informed consent, right? Ensuring that informed consent in data collection process is crucial for tribal communities obtaining meaningful and culturally appropriate consent. Not just getting it, but like culturally relevant and appropriate consent can be challenging due to historical mistrust, power imbalances, and language barriers. Additionally, with new collection teams out there and research projects, tribes have a lot more opportunities to guide research methods, the stewardship, the governance, ownership, and security from here on, right? And again, from here on. However, there is still a chance to go back and amend some of the issues we have, like putting local context labels and all of these kind of things on there so that we know who owned it, where it was sourced from, and all of these really big questions. Stewardship. So I'm talking about preservation and access. Effective data stewardship involves preserving and maintaining tribal data for future generations while ensuring appropriate access for tribal communities and researchers. Limited resources and infrastructure, of course, always pose challenges to long-term data stewardship. Also then, part of stewardship is capacity building. Building the capacity of tribal communities in data stewardship practices, including data management, curation, and preservation, is essential. Providing training and support can empower tribes to effectively steward their data and make informed decisions. Those informed decisions then move into governance there. We're talking about jurisdictional complexity. Jurisdictional complexity is real, right? It's crazy. It's bananas here. But data sovereignty can be complicated with overlapping jurisdiction between tribe, federal, state authorities. Conflicting laws and regulations may hinder tribes' ability to exercise full control over their data. Which brings me to TikTok in the state of Montana. So through a show of hands, digital virtual hands, how many people are in Montana right now? I see one. Oh, I see two. All right. I think I see two then. Oh, three. All right. All right. I got you. Four. All right. So, and then now, you know, like, right, TikTok has been made illegal, right? That crazy governor from California came up and started writing all these laws. Anyway, I digress. But where do we go from here now that TikTok has been effectively barred or banned, right? And I was reading about this as it was happening, because I'm from Montana. I live in Washington now. Now the question is, and I was reading it through Indian Country Today, plug for ICT, is now what? Where do we go from here? Because my question beyond that is, what is stopping us from moving forward without the state input? They routinely omit our voices or exclude us from the conversation. So why can't tribes do it ourselves? That's a big question. And, you know, again, that's that overlapping jurisdiction. If we're sharing data servers, or we're sharing wiring, or we're sharing wavelengths, all that stuff, this becomes a really big question. Because I think, although I don't personally use TikTok, I think this is just another example of a state overreaching into tribal sovereignty. And if folks don't see that right now, we're going to miss a lot. It's going to be coming down the pike. Does that make sense? Because most of the time it's a hurry up and wait. Well, now we got to wait to see what happens. Well, what should happen is maybe the local tribes, maybe up in Fort Belknap, say, yeah, actually, we're going to host we're going to host it now. We're going to have an agreement with another data server, and we're going to make sure that it's still accessible, right? Those are the kind of things that I think that we should be doing, because again, this is just another overreach. Although it's not taxes, right? It's not income-based, it is vastly overreaching. So I hope folks, you know, and now the other states, when these things kind of happen, it was just a really current example that I wanted to talk about. So that lack of decision-making power, limited involvement of tribes in decision-making processes related to data collection, storage, and use can undermine their ability to control and govern their own data. This can result in data being used or shared in ways that do not align with tribal values, interests, or priorities, right? That happens. Then we go on to ownership. Well, what are the ownership priorities? Is ownership one of them? Well, tribes face a lot of challenges in establishing clear ownership rights over their data. There's a lack of recognition that tribes often face challenges in establishing legal recognition and ownership rights over their data. Existing data governance frameworks may not adequately address tribal sovereignty and data ownership in the digital age. There's also the external data collection. Data collected by external entities such as government agencies, researchers, corporations may not recognize or respect tribal ownership rights. This can lead to the appropriation or misappropriation of tribal data without proper consent or benefit to the tribes. So it's not just extractive data research practices coming in, getting our language, leaving, writing a book, and then sending us a signed copy. We got that. What we want is all the data you collected to come back to us. Then you can publish what we say is appropriate. You see the difference there? Rather than giving informed consent at the beginning, and that being the umbrella decision, no, what happens is we should also have the right to pull our information out along the way, including after publication. These are some IRB processes that I recommend to tribes who are getting into the research practices, right? Or who want to manage their data, their confidentiality, their availability, all of that stuff. Informed consent is a really, really valuable tool when we need it. So that we have ownership, we move on down to security. Now, security is pretty big because we have limited resources. Many tribes face resource constraint, including financial limitations and technical expertise, right? This can hinder our ability to implement robust data security measures, right? Not just from hacking or physical, but a lot of data that's already out there. Like, we want to reclaim it, but the fact is they keep citing the wrong sheet or the wrong information. That happens a lot, doesn't it? We see a story on your tribe and you've been trying to address it and it just keeps getting started over and over and over, right? Want to be the story of Pocahontas. You see what I'm saying? That is misinformation at that point. Now they know it's wrong, so now it is disinformation. Cybersecurity threats. Tribes, like other entities, are vulnerable to data threats, cyber threats, excuse me, data breaches and unauthorized access. This security risks can compromise the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of tribal data. I don't know how many of you got the letter from, I think, from the BIA saying that a laptop had been stolen out of a police cruiser and our data was compromised. I say we because I received that letter and I was like, what the heck? Wasn't there secure access to it? How is this possible? Those are big questions. Like, that is a really simple way for our information to be taken, right? When it's on an unsecured server, which is where I'm talking about tribal data sovereignty and cyber threats. Data breaches and misuses. So we have unauthorized data access. Instances that have occurred where external entities or researchers access tribal data without proper consent, resulting in a misuse or misrepresentation of information. One example that comes to mind is the Havasupai case on genetic research. Does anybody know what that is, or everybody know? Okay, I'll go over it real quick. In 2004, the Havasupai tribe filed a lawsuit against the Arizona Board of Regents and Arizona State University researchers upon discovering their DNA samples initially collected for genetic studies on type 2 diabetes had been used in several other genetic studies. 2004 is not that long ago, folks. The lawsuit reached a settlement in April 2010 that included monetary compensation and return of DNA samples to the Havasupai, but left no legal precedence for researchers. I know at that point, sometimes we just want to be over and done with stuff. That is a huge issue. We also have, when it comes to misuse, is cultural identity, intellectual property theft. Native American tribes have experienced cases where their traditional knowledge, cultural artifacts, and sacred materials were exploited, commercialized, or appropriated without the consent or benefit. You know, these things are out there. Data sovereignty violations. There have been instances where tribal data was collected, stored, or shared without respecting sovereignty or protocols, which undermined the self-determination and rights of Native American communities. Some examples from the American Indian Health Commission cite state responded to national media requests that include tribal data without consent, state government use of non-official data about tribes and official public documents without public permission, state sharing individual tribes' vaccine information without tribes' permission, states or local governments impeding tribal health jurisdictions' access to public health data essential to exercising their public health authority and performing their governmental functions. The reason that's so fresh is because we're still coming out of COVID, aren't we? This lack of data protection mechanisms is so massive. I don't think we've even realized that it's happening. Inadequate legal frameworks and data protection measures can leave tribes' data vulnerable to exploitation, breaches, or misuse by external entities, or even within tribal communities. You know, when you're trying to get enrolled, call your auntie up, right? I know I'm telling a joke, but I was saying, like, sometimes you know somebody who knows somebody. You see what I'm saying? That can be a misuse, folks. You see, especially when we're in the Department of Education and you want to get grades, people forget that FERP was a thing, right? See how it all kind of ties together? An example of challenges to tribal data sovereignty, you already did TikTok, but I want to talk about real briefly about this FCC digital spectrum. So how many of you, and this is show of hands again, how many of you have a TV at home? Right? Okay. Now, how many of you still have rabbit ears on your TV? For those that know rabbit ears, an antenna, aluminum foil, wire hanger, all these things, right? To kind of boost your signal. All right, I see Donna knows what I'm talking about, where you had to go outside and twist the thing, and you only got one channel on ABC. So yeah, I know that's what I'm talking about. But the thing is that we went to a fully digital box now, because you have that little cable box, right? Even if it's local channels. So when that happened, when the FCC monetized, so created a price value to that digital spectrum, tribes were not consulted. We were not consulted. And I have challenged this many times to the FCC at tribal meetings, saying, oh, we can apply for a grant now. What happened to when you took it without our consent and without paying us for it? That's pretty big, folks, because if you look at your treaties, if it's core to cosmos, if we can get our natural resources out of the ground, water, well, the fact is that because it's a military, or because a reservation has the same designation as a military base, then the airspace and the airwaves are also sovereign. So they should have consulted us before they put a value to that and took away millions of acres of information. That's pretty big. I like to challenge them a lot on that one. Because I'm a geek like that. Well, let's move on to promising practices on the next page there. Let's see, there we go. And I'll pick up the pace a little bit. I know I'm running low. Well, promising practices that I've really seen are independent tribal IRBs. I'm seeing a lot of tribes are creating their own IRBs, or individual review boards for research. And so looking at 45 CFR 46, the IHS has shown and has talked about the increased use of IRBs, and actually has a list of those tribes of IRBs. I also say, well, if we're going to work with those tribes, shouldn't those IRBs carry forward data or digital sovereignty at that point, not just personally identifiable health information, but personally identifiable information, PII. Big questions, right? Like some of those things that we can see. The establishment of tribal IRBs is important to tribal sovereignty for several reasons. I'm gonna go ahead and speed up. Protecting tribal data and participants, like the Havasupai case we were talking about. safeguarding tribal sovereignty, because then we have control over the research that's conducted within our communities. Third would be upholding ethical standards, right? They ensure that research obtain informed consent. We talked about that a little bit there. 4 would be promoting community engagement. We got to get tribal input, right? So the research that I'm going to do, and I can't say with Ms. Nason currently, when I go, I'm going to have to meet with the council, general counsel, business council. I want to make sure that I meet with everybody and make myself as available as possible and continue to have availability and promote that far and wide, because we need to have community engagement with these research practices. And finally, we need to enhance the 5th for key successful policies, is enhancing data governance, because this established policies and procedures. Because once you have policy and procedure, just like at Department of Ed, we have EDGAR, right? We have EDGAR. I know that part. So we have to at least have all of those for each of our federal grants. So we should also have some for tribal research, right? These key elements to success are community engagement. I really love that part. I just really dug deep into that for this presentation. And as you heard above, involving tribal community in the development and implementation of data sovereignty is crucial. And I wrote it italicized in my notes. It's crucial. This ensures that policies reflect community needs, values, and aspirations, and increase community ownership and support, right? Also, it allows us, if we are unsure and don't like it, we can also rescind our informed consent. So when I write IRBs, I always add that part, right? The data governance, because then you create a structure, and the data sharing agreements. I saw that there's a few presentations on data sharing agreements, so I'll let them talk about it more, but I'm saying that these agreements with external entities respect sovereignty and protect tribal data rights. These agreements should address issues like ownership, control, access, security, IP, or intellectual property, and all that stuff. I know this is one thing. This is only tribal IRBs. So, but I believe that establishing these is a crucial aspect of tribal data sovereignty. It allows tribes to have control over research activities, safeguard, uphold standards, and promote community engagement and self-determination. It's pretty big. Another example of successful policies and practices can be found via owned and controlled tribal data centers. An example of a native-owned data center is the data center operated by Innova Data Solutions, a subsidiary of NovaCore, a Navajo Nation-owned IT company. That's actually pretty exciting. So let's go on to legal frameworks. And we have legal frameworks. That's the, I don't know, did the thing go back? Can you go to slide 11, please? There you go, thank you. So I'll go quick here. Treaties, well, we know they exist, right? We know all of them have been busted, and we know all of them are a challenge to us, but I think it's important that we discuss that a little bit here. So treaties, when I'm talking about is the recognition of tribal sovereignty. I talk about the treaty provisions on land and resources, because treaties involve provisions related to land and research, land and natural resources, which are integral to tribal data sovereignty. These provisions often recognize tribal ownership and control over ancestral lands. Data sovereignty extends to data collected or derived from tribal lands and resources. That's why I put it in there, as tribes have inherent rights to govern and control the use and dissemination of such data. Did we ever think about that? Like our stories, our ways of managing our forests or our rice or our wild grasses, that is traditionally held knowledge. And if somebody wants to come and do research on it, they must go through these policies, because this is protected through frameworks of treaties and other governmental policies, decisions, executive orders, all of those things. So I know that not all of us have treaties. We also have the tribal governance and decision-making. We have trust responsibility and federal obligations, which is why we're all meeting. We also have federal laws, but right now there's not a specific law that addresses tribal sovereignty at its core. There are a few that have a little bit of it on there, and so one of them that's a little bit tenuous at best, and a stretch for sure, is the Indian South, or excuse me, let's see here. How's it today? Yep. Okay, so yeah, so really tenuous, I guess is how I'd say it would be the Indian Self-Determination Education Act. While it doesn't say specifically, um, tribal data sovereignty, but it does grant the authority to assume control over planning, implementation, and administration of federal services and programs that support our tribes, which could be a data center, it could be a cloud-based data program, it could be all kinds of stuff that we need. Another law that I picked out was the Indian Child Welfare Act of all of them, because ICWA recognizes the importance of tribal sovereignty and the rights of tribes to be involved in child welfare proceedings. Well, if we don't know where our kids are in our own data systems or our own our databases, how can we support? So these tribes or these laws are, like I said, tenuous, but there's enough there that I think grade them all together. Then you have the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. This is for healthcare services, but it's also about culturally appropriate care. This law recognizes the importance of data in improving health outcomes and healthcare delivery. So that's why I pulled these three out. And there's more, but those are the three that I really focus on. For current legal landscapes, we have tribal consultation, we have data privacy and protections, we have tribal data codes. And for some of those tribes that already have IRB, I pulled out a few, were the Blackfeet Nation, Cherokee Nation and Tahlequah, the Chickasaw Nation, Ho-Chunk Nation, Oglala Sioux, Tribal Research Review Board. These are from the IHS. So if you want to see if yours is on there, that's where it's at. You have executive orders and policies like 13,007 Indian sacred sites. That's important because knowing where a sacred sites is tribal data sovereignty, and we should have the ability to keep that information to ourselves, right? If a government agency wanted to know, we could give them a general area within federal boundaries, all while keeping the specific location to ourselves in tribally held knowledge. Do you see like how we kind of like pull those things out? Potential areas for improvement, I know I'm running out of time, there's a lot. So what we need is clearer recognition of tribal sovereignty, enhanced tribal consultation, data ownership and control, data security and privacy, cultural and intellectual property protections, interagency collaboration and coordination and capacity building, and technical assistance for our tribes. My recommendations, and the final one I'm going to get to, I think here, is I don't normally like to hedge my bets when it comes to my work, but this list is not exhaustive. And it may not be useful tomorrow. However, this is what I see as opportunities, while also reminding folks that I am a scientist and I'm wrong all the time. Many of these recommendations can be used across programs and projects collaborating with tribes. There are also, like many recommendations, currently available in research and tribal relations policies. We need to support tribal governments. We need to partner across federal agencies through enhanced tribal consultation, the training, the streamlined data sharing agreements, and other stakeholders would be like universities to collaborate with tribal organizations and governments, support capacity building through training, technical assistance, and mentorship, advocacy for policy changes. And because we universities have massive folks that get out there and lobby on our behalf, but we also need potential funding and policy changes. So increase funding for tribal data initiatives, develop a data sovereignty focus grant, ensure culturally appropriate data practices. Again, these are just the starting point. There's a lot. So modified approaches and solutions should be developed in consultation with tribes to ensure specific context and goals are at the core of the work. So now you can see, if you go to our page here of the questions, we're back to our questions that guide us. Slide 13. Now you kind of have a familiarity with what TDS is. You now know ancestral data. You already knew it. Now there's just another definition. You see some of these challenges. And so in conclusion, I'll say, this is a big question. What is tribal data sovereignty? It's inherent rights. It is the right of our tribes to control and manage our own information. It is complex, and it needs to be community-centered at its engagement. By acknowledging the importance of community-centered engagement and recognizing the complexity, we can nurture a more comprehensive and holistic approach to empower tribal communities in their data governance and protect their cultural heritage. And with that, we did it, folks. Yay! I got 3 minutes. Yeah, I had more, but whew. Right on. So questions, I have 2 minutes. I was trying to get to that point where we had a couple of seconds here of questions. So And I think this slideshow is available to everybody. And if you go down, you can see where I sourced some of my information from Dr. Marisa Duarte, Dr. Miranda Bellardi Lewis, Dr. Sandy Littletree, Dr. Cheryl Matoyer, Dr. Desi Rodriguez Lone Bear. And let's see who else is there. Dr. Carol, excuse me, Stephanie. So those are some of my mentors that I'm learning from all the time. So I don't know anything. So we have any questions? It's a lot. It is a lot. So I appreciate you riding that out. All right. Well, do we have any questions? Donna, do you got anything for me?
I don't have any questions right now. I will, though. I would love to email you back and get another discussion going, maybe with just our OIE team, because I learned a lot. I thank you.
My pleasure. All right, folks. Well, I have my final papers due on Thursday, so it never ends. You got any questions, Sarah? I thought you had something there.
No, we just appreciate you taking time out of your very busy end of semester and with your paper due. You're correct. Your presentation is uploaded so people can get all of these great links and slides and resources, as well as your contact information. So thank you again. Next up for everyone else, and you, if you want to procrastinate on your paper for a few more minutes.
I always do.
Is that we will be opening up the roundtables. So feel free to head over to the lounge and you'll be able to join a roundtable on a topic of your selection and just have a nice discussion and network with your peers. And then we'll be back again tomorrow for a great keynote from Dr. Michael Yellowbird to kick off day 2.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you all.
Thank you so much.